March 2000, the Philippine government made a pivotal decision that would define the course of the peace process for years to come. On March 21, 2000, then-President Joseph Ejercito Estrada stood before the public in Causwagan, Lanao del Norte and declared an all-out war against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or MILF. This announcement came at the height of escalating tensions and violent encounters between the government forces and the MILF in several parts of Mindanao. Estrada's declaration signaled the formal suspension of peace negotiations which has been cautiously progressing since 1997. The peace talks had begun in earnest in 1997 under the administration of President Fidel V. Ramos with the goal of finding a political solution to the decades-old Moro conflict. The MILF, a breakaway group from the Moro National Liberation Front (MNLF), was seeking autonomy and recognition of their ancestral domain in Mindanao. But the fragile peace was repeatedly disrupted by violent incidents on both sides. By early 2000, clashes had intensified, particularly following the MILF's occupation of government buildings and alleged involvement in attacks on civilians. One major incident occurred in February 2000 when MILF forces reportedly staged multiple coordinated attacks, including the takeover of the town hall of Causwagan and the Ozamis Ferry bombing, which killed at least 44 people. These events escalated pressure on the Estrada administration to take decisive actions.
The causes and triggers of the all-out war declared by President Joseph Estrada against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or MILF in the year 2000. To understand the war, we need to look at what happened before the declaration. During the late 1990s, the government and the MILF were engaged in peace talks. However, tensions kept rising due to a series of violent incidents. The government accused the MILF of launching attacks on civilian areas and military bases. There were ambushes, bombings, and even hostage-taking incidents. These events caused fear and pressure on the government to act. In response, President Estrada took a strong position. He said the MILF had betrayed the peace process and could no longer be trusted. He announced that his administration would no longer negotiate with what he called terrorists. This was the start of his policy of total war. Some political analysts believed that there were deeper reasons behind the war. At the time, Estrada was facing corruption issues and falling approval ratings. Launching a war allowed him to appear strong and distract the public. In March 2000, President Estrada officially declared the all-out war against the MILF. This marked a major shift from peace efforts to military action. It was a turning point in the Moro conflict in Mindanao. To summarize, the war was triggered by rising violence, failed peace talks, and President Estrada's desire to appear tough on security, but it also had deeper political motives. The next part of our presentation will explore the military operations that followed the declaration.
The 2000 all-out war between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or also known as the MILF. So on March 21, 2000, President Joseph Estrada officially declared an all-out war against the MILF. So he accused the group of violating peace agreements and attacking both civilians and military forces in Mindanao. So, in response, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, or the AFP, launched one of the largest military campaigns in the country since the Marcos era. The main target of this campaign was Camp Abu Bakar, the largest and most strategic base of the MILF. It is located in Maguindanao. Also, on April 28, 2000, government forces began a major assault on Camp Abu Bakar using airstrikes, ground troops, and artillery. So this marked a significant turning point in the conflict. Just a few days later, on May 3, 2000, a major clash occurred between the AFP soldiers and the MILF rebels. So this battle resulted in the deaths of at least 35 individuals, highlighting the intensity and human cost of the war. The fighting continued for months. So by July 2000, the government forces had successfully captured Camp Abu Bakr. So the Philippine flag was raised over the camp in a symbolic act of victory. However, while the camp seizure was seen as a tactical success, many MILF fighters simply retreated and shifted to guerrilla warfare in other areas. So the AFP played a critical role throughout their campaign. They mobilized thousands of troops. They have conducted clearing operations and claiming major victories. During this time, the offensive also caused widespread civilian displacement and drew criticism from human rights groups. So in conclusion, the military operations of the 2000 all-out war were aggressive and wide-reaching. They succeeded in capturing MILF camps, especially Camp Abu Bakr, but also left long-lasting consequences for both the people of Mindanao and the peace process that followed.
Though the war aimed to restore peace and government control, it instead sparked a humanitarian crisis resulting in loss of lives, widespread violence, and a large-scale displacement of civilians. Because of the all-out war declared by former President Estrada, almost 1 million people were forced to flee their homes. Many of those displaced were women and children from rural farming communities. According to a report made for the World Bank, about 932,000 people were displaced due to the conflict. This was because many of the camps targeted were actually communities run by the MILF, which included large numbers of civilians and important infrastructures like mosques, madrasas, and homes. As a result, many civilians lost their houses and main sources of livelihood. Most of the evacuees were farming families from remote rural areas. They traded with a few local traders who controlled farming supplies and provided loans for planting rice and corn. When the war began, many farmers lost their land, animals, crops, and other valuable resources. Consequently, the war caused a sudden and severe loss of income for these families. Although the war lasted only a few months, displaced families could not return immediately to their homes. For that reason, they had to stay longer in evacuation centers, and many had to sell some of the assets they brought with them just to buy enough food. In a November 2000 Oxfam survey, 58% of displaced families said their children had stopped going to school. Some even borrowed money with interest in order to survive. When fighting slowed down after the fall of Camp Abu Bakr in July 2000, some evacuees were allowed to visit their communities during the day, but only to retrieve any belongings they could find. The damage left behind was overwhelming. Entire communities, including homes, mosques, and schools, were burned. The lack of basic needs such as food, clean water, and healthcare worsened the situation. It was especially difficult for Muslims to return home compared to Christians, partly because evacuation centers were often located far from Muslim communities. Many Muslims living near MILF camps were afraid to go back due to the continued presence of soldiers and the risk of renewed fighting. Muslims and Christians who once lived together in a mixed community were hesitant to go back because of fear and mistrust. As a result, many areas became more segregated as people chose to live with their own group. During the all-out war, reports of human rights abuses were widespread. Some civilians lost their lives or were injured because they were mistakenly seen as part of the conflict. Indiscriminate bombings and attacks caused fear and suffering among innocent people. The all-out war triggered strong reactions both within the Philippines and internationally. Many Muslim communities and peace advocates strongly opposed the war, believing it harmed innocent civilians and worsened the conflict. Human rights groups and civil society organizations also criticized the government's military approach. In addition, international organizations responded, such as the World Bank's Post-Conflict Fund Supported Program, which began in January 2001, and it helped displaced families return and rebuild their communities after the 2000 all-out war.
After the 2000 all-out war severely damaged the peace process between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. negotiations stalled and trust eroded significantly. Both sides retreated to their position, hindering any further attempts at reconciliation. The war created a deep trust in MILF in the government relations. Mutual suspicion and distrust become deeply entrenched. This impacts future peace talks, making progress slow and arduous. The conflict also led to increased military actions and civilian casualties, further exacerbating the situation. And during the Arroyo's administration inherited a complex and volatile situation. While initially cautious, the administrations eventually resumed peace negotiations with the MILF, albeit with a renewed focus on security concerns. This period show a shift in tactics with a greater emphasis on addressing the root causes of the conflict. The 2000 all-out war highlighted the fragility of peace process and devastating consequences of armed conflict. It underscored the need for sustained dialogue, genuine commitment for all parties, and a comprehensive approach that addresses the underlying issues fueling the conflict. The war also demonstrated the importance of building trust and fostering mutual understanding between warring factions. Ultimately, it served as stark reminder that lasting peace requires more than just ceasefires. It requires addressing the root causes of conflict and building a shared vision for the future.